Kethavar Nulthe stood before the massive display screen in the Confederation High Command Chamber. The blue light from the holographic star map cast strange shadows across his gray skin. He had been waiting for 20 minutes, which was unusual. The High Command never kept anyone waiting, especially not their most experienced xenobiologist. The chamber doors opened with a soft hiss. Admiral Vextal entered, followed by two other officials Kethavar did not recognize. The Admiral's face looked troubled, something that made Kethavar's stomach tighten with worry. "Thank you for coming so quickly," Admiral Vextal said. His voice carried the formal tone reserved for important assignments. "We have a situation that requires your particular expertise." Kethavar nodded and waited. In his 40 years of service to the Confederation, he had studied dozens of species across the galaxy. Some were peaceful traders, others were aggressive warriors, and a few were so strange that understanding them took years of careful observation. But he had never seen the Admiral look this uncomfortable. "3 months ago, we made contact with a new species," the Admiral continued. "They call themselves humans. They come from a planet called Earth in a system they name Sol. The species is young by our standards. They have only recently developed faster than light travel." Kethavar pulled out his data pad to take notes. New species were always interesting, though most followed predictable patterns. The young ones usually fell into two categories. Either they were peaceful and eager to learn, or they were aggressive and needed careful handling until they matured. "The humans have requested to join our coalition against the Mordak Empire," Admiral Vextal said. "Normally we would decline. Their technology is primitive compared to ours. Their ships are crude, their weapons are basic, and their understanding of galactic politics is almost non-existent." "But," Kethavar asked, sensing there was more to the story. "But our intelligence reports are conflicting." One of the other officials spoke up. "Some scouts report that humans are weak and disorganized. Others claim they are dangerous in ways we do not understand. We need someone to observe them directly and give us an accurate assessment." Admiral Vextal activated the holographic display. Images of human ships appeared in the air between them. Kethavar studied the vessels with interest. They were indeed primitive, built with heavy metal plating and chemical propulsion systems. They looked more like the warships of species that were still learning to fight in space. "The humans have offered to send a military unit to join our forces in the Kepler sector," the Admiral explained. "We want you to embed with them as an observer, study their tactics, their psychology, their effectiveness in combat. We need to know if they will be useful allies or if they will simply get in our way." Kethavar looked at the human ship designs more carefully. Something about them seemed odd, though he could not immediately identify what bothered him. The ships were functional but appeared to be designed for one purpose: destruction. Most young species built exploration vessels or defensive platforms. These humans seemed to have jumped straight to building weapons. "What do we know about their history?" Kethavar asked. The second official, a thin female with pale skin, stepped forward. "That is part of what concerns us. Human history is filled with conflict. They have been fighting wars on their homeworld for thousands of years. Even now, as they reach for the stars, they still have disputes among their own kind. Many young species have violent pasts," Kethavar replied. "Most grow out of it as they develop better technology and more efficient forms of government. The humans are different," Admiral Vextal said quietly. "They have not grown out of it. If anything, they have become better at it. Their entire civilization seems built around the concept of organized violence." Kethavar felt a chill run down his spine. In all his years of studying alien species, he had never encountered one that remained actively warlike after achieving space travel. The energy and resources required for interstellar expansion usually forced species to abandon military conflicts in favor of exploration and trade. "I will need access to all available data on human culture and technology," Kethavar said. "When do I leave?" "Tomorrow," the Admiral replied. "A transport will take you to the Kepler sector, where you will meet with the human military commander. His name is Captain Lee Hyun. Our translators have been working with their language, so communication should not be a problem." The Admiral paused and looked directly at Kethavar. "I must emphasize the importance of this mission. The Mordak Empire has been growing more aggressive. They have developed new weapons that have proven effective against our traditional allies. If the humans can provide some advantage in this conflict, we need to know. But if they are going to be a liability, we need to know that too." Kethavar gathered his data pad and prepared to leave. As he reached the door, the Admiral called out to him. "One more thing," Admiral Vextel said. "Be careful. Some of our scouts who have observed humans in combat have requested transfers to other assignments. When asked why, they refused to discuss their experiences." The next day, Kethvar found himself aboard a Confederation transport ship heading toward the Kepler sector. He spent the journey reading everything available about human civilization. The more he learned, the more puzzled he became. Humans had developed remarkable technology in a very short time. Their medical science was advanced, their engineering was innovative, and their computer systems were surprisingly sophisticated. They had created art, music, and literature that showed deep emotional complexity. They were clearly intelligent and capable of great creativity, but woven throughout their entire history was an unbroken thread of warfare. They had fought with sticks and stones, then with metal weapons, then with explosive devices, and finally with weapons that could destroy entire cities. Each time they developed new technology, they found ways to use it for fighting. What truly disturbed Kethvar was that humans did not seem to fight only when necessary. They fought for resources, for territory, for ideas, and sometimes for no reason that other species could understand. They had even developed elaborate rules for how to conduct wars, as if they expected fighting to be a permanent part of their existence. The transport ship dropped out of faster-than-light travel near a small space station. Through the viewing port, Kethvar could see human ships docked at the station. Up close, they looked even more intimidating than in the holographic displays. The metal plating was scarred and dented, suggesting these vessels had seen actual combat. Weapon systems were mounted at multiple points along each hull, and the ship's designs prioritized function over beauty. A shuttle brought Kethvar to the station. As he walked through the docking bay, he noticed human soldiers moving equipment. They worked efficiently and quietly, but there was something about their movements that made him nervous. They moved like predators, constantly aware of their surroundings and ready to react to threats. Captain Lee Hyun met Kethvar at the station's command center. The human was shorter than Kethvar had expected, with dark hair and intelligent eyes. He wore a military uniform that was practical rather than decorative, and he carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to making life-and-death decisions. "Welcome to Forward Station 7, Captain Lee said through the translation device. "I understand you will be observing our operations." "That is correct," Kethvar replied. "I am here to learn about human military capabilities." Captain Lee smiled, but the expression did not reach his eyes. "I hope you have a strong stomach. War is not a clean business, especially the way we do it." As they walked through the station, Captain Lee introduced Kethvar to other members of his unit. Sergeant Kim Dow was a veteran soldier with scars on his hands and a calm manner that suggested extensive combat experience. Private Park Sol was young and eager. Though Kethvar noticed the human carried his weapon with the easy familiarity of someone who had been trained to use it from an early age. "How long have you been fighting the Mordak?" Kethvar asked. "We have not fought them yet," Captain Lee replied. "This will be our first engagement against them. But we have been fighting someone or something for most of our history. The enemy changes, but the skills remain the same." That evening, Kethvar was assigned quarters near the human section of the station. As he tried to sleep, he could hear the humans talking in the next compartment. They spoke casually about tactics, about weapons, about the upcoming battle. They discussed the possibility of death with the same tone they might use to talk about the weather. Kethvar realized that his assignment was going to be more challenging than he had anticipated. These humans were not like any species he had studied before. They seemed to view warfare not as a necessary evil, but as a natural part of existence. Tomorrow he would see them in actual combat, and he was beginning to suspect that experience would change his understanding of what intelligent beings were capable of doing to each other. The alarm that woke Kethvar was unlike anything he had heard before. It was not the gentle tone used by Confederation ships, but a harsh, urgent sound that made his heart race before he was fully awake. He stumbled from his bed and found Captain Lee Hyun waiting outside his quarters. "The Mordak have attacked our forward positions on Kepler 442b, the human said. His voice was calm, but Kethvar could see tension in the way he held his shoulders. "We deploy in 30 minutes. Stay close to me and do exactly what I tell you." Kethvar had observed military operations before, but never from so close to the action. As he followed Captain Lee through the station corridors, he watched human soldiers preparing for battle. They moved with practiced efficiency, checking weapons and equipment with the speed that came from endless repetition. Sergeant Kim Dow approached them, carrying what appeared to be protective gear. "This is for you," he told Kethvar, holding up a vest made of thick material. "It will not stop everything, but it might keep you alive long enough to regret coming with us." The comment might have been a joke, but Sergeant Kim's expression suggested he was completely serious. Kethvar put on the protective vest and followed the humans to their transport ship. The journey to Kepler 442b took 6 hours. During the flight, Kethvar watched the human soldiers prepare for combat. They cleaned their weapons with careful attention to detail. They studied maps of the battle area until they could describe every hill and building from memory. They checked and rechecked their equipment. But what struck Kethvar most was how they talked to each other. They did not speak of glory or honor, the way young warriors from other species often did. Instead, they discussed practical matters: where to find cover, how to help wounded comrades, what to do if their communication systems failed. Private Parksall sat across from Kethvar, carefully loading ammunition into magazines. The young human worked with steady hands, but Kethvar noticed sweat on his forehead, despite the cool temperature in the transport. "Is this your first battle?" Kethvar asked. Parksall nodded without looking up from his work. "Yes, but I have been training for this since I was old enough to hold a weapon. All humans learn to fight, we have to. Our world taught us that those who cannot protect themselves do not survive." The transport ship shuddered as it entered the planet's atmosphere. Through the small windows, Kethvar could see the surface of Kepler 442b. It had once been a peaceful world with green forests and blue rivers. Now smoke rose from burning cities, and the landscape was scarred with the marks of orbital bombardment. Captain Lee stood up and addressed his soldiers. "The Mordak have taken the eastern district of Settlement 7. Intelligence reports say they are using some kind of new weapon that affects the mind. Our coalition allies were forced to retreat after their troops became unable to function." "What kind of weapon?" Sergeant Kim asked. "Something that causes extreme fear," Captain Lee replied. The few survivors who made it back described feeling terror so intense they could not move or think clearly. The Mordak seemed to be immune to their own weapon. Kethvar felt a chill of worry. Psychological warfare was considered one of the most effective tactics against most species. If the Mordak had developed a fear-inducing weapon, it could change the entire war. The transport landed in a clearing several kilometers from Settlement 7. As the humans disembarked, Kethvar was struck by how quickly they moved from the relaxed atmosphere of the flight to complete combat readiness. They spread out in formation, with each soldier knowing exactly where to position himself in relation to the others. Captain Lee led them through the forest toward the settlement. The trees provided cover, but Kethvar could see signs of recent fighting everywhere. Burned vehicles lay scattered along the road, and the smell of smoke filled the air. They had walked for an hour when the attack came. The sound hit them first, a low-frequency hum that seemed to vibrate in Kethvar's bones. Then came the fear. It was unlike anything Kethvar had ever experienced. Terror flooded through his mind with such intensity that his vision blurred and his legs became weak. The fear was not directed at any specific threat, but was instead a pure, overwhelming dread that made rational thought almost impossible. Kethvar fell to his knees, gasping for breath. Around him, he could see other coalition soldiers who had been advancing through different parts of the forest. They were all affected the same way, dropping their weapons and crying out in panic. But the humans were different. Captain Lee staggered for a moment when the fear weapon hit, and Kethvar saw pain cross his face, but instead of falling down, the human gritted his teeth and kept moving forward. Around him, his soldiers were doing the same. They were clearly affected by the weapon, but they fought through the fear with a determination that seemed almost supernatural. "Move forward," Captain Lee shouted over the humming sound. "Whatever you are feeling, push through it. Remember your training." Sergeant Kim was pale and sweating, but he raised his weapon and began shooting at Mordak positions that Kethvar could barely see through his fear-blurred vision. Private Parksall was shaking visibly, but he continued to advance with the rest of his unit. The Mordak forces emerged from their concealed positions, expecting to find paralyzed enemies. Instead, they faced humans who were somehow still fighting despite being affected by a weapon that had stopped every other species in its tracks. Kethvar watched in amazement as the battle unfolded. The humans moved with deadly precision. using the terrain to their advantage and coordinating their attacks with hand signals. When the fear weapon made verbal communication difficult, they were clearly terrified, but they channeled that fear into focused aggression. Private Park Saul spotted a Mordak soldier trying to flank their position. Despite being in his first battle and affected by psychological warfare, the young human made a decision that saved his unit. He charged across open ground, drawing enemy fire away from his comrades and allowing Sergeant Kim to eliminate the threat. The charge should have been suicide. The distance was too far, the enemy fire too heavy. But Park Saul reached his target and eliminated the Mordak soldier with efficient, brutal combat techniques. When he returned to the group, his hands were shaking and his face was white with terror, but his eyes were clear and focused. How? Kethavar managed to ask Captain Lee during a brief pause in the fighting. How are you still fighting when that weapon should make you helpless? Captain Lee looked at him with an expression that was difficult to read. Fear is just another part of war, he said. We learn to live with it, to use it. A soldier who feels no fear makes stupid mistakes. A soldier who lets fear control him dies quickly. We find the balance. The battle continued for 3 more hours. The humans systematically eliminated Mordak positions with tactics that were both intelligent and ruthless. They took risks that no other species would consider reasonable, but those risks led to victory. When the fear weapon finally stopped, the sudden silence was almost as disturbing as the humming had been. Kethavar found himself able to think clearly for the first time since the attack began. Around him, coalition soldiers from other species were slowly recovering, looking confused and ashamed of their inability to fight. But the humans were already moving to secure the area and treat their wounded. They had never stopped functioning, even under psychological assault that had completely incapacitated trained warriors from advanced civilizations. Sergeant Kim helped Kethavar to his feet. Are you injured? He asked. Kethavar shook his head, though he felt exhausted from the experience. How long have humans been able to resist psychological weapons? We have always fought our own fears, Sergeant Kim replied. On Earth, survival meant facing things that terrified us. Wild animals, natural disasters, enemy tribes. We learned that fear is information, not instructions. It tells us something is dangerous, but it does not tell us to run away. As they walked through the captured settlement, Kethavar saw the aftermath of human warfare for the first time. The Mordak soldiers had been eliminated with an efficiency that was both impressive and disturbing. The humans had not wasted ammunition or effort, but they had also shown no mercy to enemies who continued to resist. Private Park Saul was helping to treat a wounded coalition soldier from another species. His hands, which had been used to kill just hours before, now worked gently to bandage injuries and provide medical care. The contrast was striking and somehow more unsettling than pure aggression would have been. That night, as they established a defensive perimeter around the settlement, Kethavar overheard human soldiers talking about the battle. They discussed what had worked well and what could be improved. They analyzed their own performance with the same clinical detachment they might use to study a technical problem. The fear weapon was strong, Private Park Saul said to Sergeant Kim, but not stronger than what we learned to handle growing up on Earth. What do you mean? Kethavar asked, unable to stop himself from joining the conversation. Park Saul looked at him with eyes that seemed older than his years. Every human child learns to function while afraid. We tell stories about monsters to teach children that scary things exist. We make them face their fears in small doses so they can handle bigger ones later. By the time we become soldiers, fear is just another tool we know how to use. Kethavar realized that he was 2 weeks after the incident with the fear weapon. Kethavar found himself aboard a human transport ship heading toward the Mordak colony world of Zerion Prime. The mission briefing had been simple: capture the planetary communication center and disrupt Mordak coordination across the sector. What the briefing had not mentioned was that Zerion Prime was a heavily populated world with millions of Mordak civilians living in massive urban centers. Lieutenant Choi Min had been promoted after Captain Lee Hyun was wounded in the previous battle. The new commander was younger than Lee, but his eyes held the same calculating coldness that Kethavar was beginning to recognize in experienced human soldiers. Beside him sat Corporal An Woo, a demolitions expert whose casual attitude toward explosives made everyone nervous except the other humans. The target is in the center of New Mordak City, Lieutenant Choi explained as he showed holographic maps to his team. 20-story building, heavily defended, surrounded by civilian structures. The Mordak are using the civilians as shields, counting on us to follow standard coalition rules of engagement. Sergeant Kim Dow studied the maps with interest. Standard rules would require us to evacuate civilians before attacking. That would take weeks and give the enemy time to relocate or destroy the communication equipment. Standard rules assume the enemy fights like civilized beings, Lieutenant Choi replied. The Mordak use civilian populations as military assets. They hide weapons in schools and hospitals. They dress soldiers as civilians. They have made their entire population part of their war machine. Kethvar felt uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. Coalition forces always protected civilian populations, even enemy civilians. It was one of the fundamental principles that separated civilized warfare from simple destruction. "What are you suggesting?" Kethvar asked. Lieutenant Choi looked at him with an expression that was difficult to read. "I am suggesting that we complete our mission using the most effective methods available. The communication center must be captured or destroyed. Everything else is secondary." The transport ship entered Zarian Prime's atmosphere under cover of darkness. Through the viewing ports, Kethvar could see the lights of New Mordak City spreading across the landscape like a glowing web. The city was beautiful in its own way, with tall spires and flowing architecture that reflected Mordak artistic sensibilities. They landed in an industrial district several kilometers from the city center. As the humans prepared their equipment, Kethvar noticed they were carrying more explosives than usual. Corporal An Wu supervised the loading of devices that Kethvar did not recognize. "What are those?" he asked. "Improvised explosive devices," An Wu replied without looking up from his work. "Made from civilian industrial chemicals, very effective for urban warfare." "You made weapons from civilian materials?" An Wu finally looked at him, and Kethvar saw something in the human's eyes that made him step backward. "I can make weapons from anything. Cleaning supplies, fertilizer, fuel, medical equipment. Humans have been doing this for thousands of years. We learned to turn everything around us into tools for survival." The team moved through the city using routes that Lieutenant Choi seemed to know by instinct. They avoided main streets and security checkpoints, moving through maintenance tunnels and abandoned buildings with the efficiency of people who understood urban warfare at a fundamental level. What disturbed Kethvar most was how quickly the humans adapted to the environment. They identified which buildings would provide good sniper positions, which intersections could be blocked to control traffic flow, and which structures could be demolished to create barriers or diversions. They looked at the city not as a place where people lived, but as a three-dimensional battlefield. "How do you know so much about fighting in cities?" Kethvar asked Lieutenant Choi as they paused in an abandoned warehouse. "All humans grow up in artificial environments," the lieutenant replied. "Cities, towns, buildings. We learn to navigate complex structures before we can walk properly. Urban warfare is just an extension of skills we develop as children." They reached the communication center at dawn. The building was exactly as described. 20 stories tall, surrounded by civilian structures and heavily defended by Mordak security forces. Kethvar could see guards on every level and defensive positions that would make a direct assault extremely costly. Lieutenant Choi studied the target through electronic binoculars for several minutes. When he lowered the device, he was smiling in a way that made Kethvar nervous. "The Mordak have made a mistake," he said. "They assume we will try to minimize civilian casualties. They have positioned their defenses based on that assumption." "What do you mean?" Sergeant Kim asked. "They have put their strongest defenses facing the open areas where a conventional assault would come from. But they have left the civilian sectors lightly defended, because they believe we will not attack through populated areas." Kethvar realized what the lieutenant was suggesting. "You cannot attack through civilian buildings. There are families in those structures. Children." Lieutenant Choi looked at him with the patient expression of someone explaining something obvious to a child. "The Mordak chose to use civilians as shields. That was their decision, not ours. We did not create this situation, but we will end it." Corporal An Wu began setting up his improvised explosives in the basement of a civilian residential building. The building housed hundreds of Mordak families, but it was positioned perfectly to provide access to the communication center's lower levels. "This will bring down 3 floors, An Wu explained as he worked. "The collapse will create a path directly into the target building's foundation. From there, we can work our way up while their security forces are dealing with the chaos above ground. You are going to kill innocent people. Kethavar said, his voice rising despite his efforts to stay calm. "We are going to complete our mission," Lieutenant Choi replied. "The Mordak killed innocent people when they started this war. They killed more innocent people when they decided to hide behind civilians. We are simply finishing what they began." As An-woo continued his preparations, Private Park Sol and 2 other soldiers set up positions to provide covering fire. Kethavar watched them work and realized they were not just following orders. They genuinely believed that their actions were justified, even necessary. "Do you feel nothing for those families?" Kethavar asked Park Sol. The young soldier stopped working and looked at him directly. "I feel sorry for them, but I feel more sorry for the families the Mordak will kill if we fail to stop their communications. War is about choosing which people die, not about preventing all death." The explosion, when it came, was precisely controlled. An-woo had calculated the charges to create maximum structural damage, while directing most of the force downward and toward the target building. 3 floors of the residential building collapsed, but the upper levels remained standing. Kethavar heard screaming from the damaged building, but the humans were already moving through the rubble toward their objective. They had achieved complete tactical surprise. Mordak security forces were rushing to help civilian casualties instead of defending their primary target. Lieutenant Choi led his team through the breach in the communication center's foundation. Inside, they encountered confused and disorganized resistance. The Mordak defenders had been trained for conventional attacks, not for enemies who would attack through civilian buildings. The fighting that followed was unlike anything Kethavar had witnessed before. The humans moved through the building with systematic efficiency, clearing each floor with tactics that seemed both highly trained and utterly ruthless. They used grenades in enclosed spaces, set fires to force defenders from cover, and eliminated wounded enemies who might recover and rejoin the fight. Corporal An-woo planted explosives throughout the building as they advanced, not just to destroy equipment, but to prevent Mordak reinforcements from following them. Each explosion was carefully placed to maximize psychological impact on the defenders, while maintaining structural integrity in the areas the humans still needed to use. "This is not warfare," Kethavar said to Sergeant Kim as they reached the 15th floor. "This is destruction. This is how humans fight when survival is at stake," Kim replied. "We do not have the luxury of fighting fair. We are outnumbered, outgunned, and far from home. We win by being more willing to do what is necessary than our enemies are." They reached the communication center's control room after 4 hours of fighting. The Mordak defenders had been systematically eliminated or forced to retreat. Lieutenant Choi immediately began downloading data from the communication systems, while An-woo prepared charges to destroy the equipment. Through the windows of the control room, Kethavar could see the damage their assault had caused. Parts of the residential building were still burning. Emergency vehicles surrounded the area, and he could see rescue workers pulling bodies from the rubble. "How many civilians died?" he asked. Lieutenant Choi paused in his work and checked a data pad. "Initial estimates suggest around 40 casualties in the residential building. Acceptable losses for a mission of this importance." "Acceptable?" Kethavar felt sick. The emergency alarm that woke Kethavar was different from any he had heard before. Instead of the steady tone that usually signaled routine alerts, this alarm came in sharp, rapid bursts that seemed to pierce directly into his brain. He stumbled from his sleeping quarters to find chaos throughout the coalition base. Commander Yoon Jae stood in the main control room, surrounded by displays showing red warning symbols. The human looked calm despite the obvious crisis, but Kethavar had learned to recognize the signs of extreme tension in human faces. Yoon Jae's jaw was tight and his hands moved with the controlled precision that humans displayed when they were fighting to maintain composure. "What is happening?" Kethavar asked. "Mordak surprise attack," replied Staff Sergeant Na Young from her position at the communications console. "They appeared out of hyperspace 20 minutes ago. Entire fleet, maybe 200 ships. They somehow bypassed our early warning systems." Through the main viewing window, Kethavar could see the battle raging in space above them. Bright flashes of weapons fire lit up the darkness as coalition ships engaged the Mordak fleet. Even from the surface, it was clear that the coalition forces were outnumbered and being pushed back toward the planet. "How many ships do we have?" Kethavar asked. 43, Commander Yoon replied without looking away from the tactical displays. "The Mordak have been planning this for months. They concentrated most of their fleet for this attack, while we were spread across multiple systems. The base shook as debris from the space battle began falling through the atmosphere. Emergency lighting activated, casting everything in a red glow that made the humans look even more ominous than usual. Evacuation shuttles are already overloaded, Staff Sergeant Na reported. We can get about 60% of base personnel off-world before the Mordak land ground forces. Kethvar felt a chill of fear. He had assumed that coalition bases were safe, protected by superior technology and careful planning. The idea that they could be overrun had never occurred to him. What about the remaining 40%? He asked. Commander Yoon looked at him with an expression that was both sad and determined. They will implement Protocol 7. Kethvar had never heard of Protocol 7, but the way the humans said it made his stomach tighten with worry. What is Protocol 7? Staff Sergeant Na and Commander Yoon exchanged a look that seemed to contain an entire conversation. Finally, Yoon spoke. Protocol 7 is what we call our final option. When human forces cannot retreat and cannot surrender, we make sure the enemy pays the highest possible price for their victory. The base shook again, more violently this time. Through the communication system, they could hear reports from the space battle. Coalition ships were being destroyed faster than they could retreat. The Mordak fleet was moving into position to begin landing troops. Sir, we have confirmed reports of Mordak transport ships entering the atmosphere, Na Young announced. Estimated landing time is 45 minutes. Commander Yoon nodded and activated a base-wide communication channel. All personnel, this is Commander Yoon. We are implementing Protocol 7. Repeat, Protocol 7 is now in effect. All essential personnel report to evacuation shuttles immediately. All remaining personnel prepare for final defensive positions. Kethvar noticed that many human soldiers did not move toward the evacuation shuttles. Instead, they began taking positions throughout the base, setting up weapons and checking equipment with the same careful attention they had shown before previous battles. Why are they not evacuating? Kethvar asked. Because someone has to stay behind to make Protocol 7 work, Commander Yoon replied. The Mordak cannot be allowed to capture this base intact. Too much valuable equipment and intelligence. Someone has to make sure everything is destroyed. Staff Sergeant Na pulled up new displays showing the base's internal systems. All essential data is being transferred to the evacuation shuttles. Automated destruction sequences are armed and ready. We can bring down the entire facility in less than 10 minutes once Protocol 7 is activated. Kethvar was beginning to understand, and the realization horrified him. You are planning to destroy the base with people still inside. We are planning to deny the enemy a strategic asset, Commander Yoon corrected. The fact that some of us will not survive is unfortunate but necessary. Through the base's communication system, Kethvar could hear human soldiers making their final preparations. They spoke to each other with casual familiarity, making jokes and sharing memories as if they were preparing for a routine mission instead of certain death. Does Protocol 7 require volunteers? Kethvar asked. Protocol 7 requires people who understand what is at stake, Staff Sergeant Na replied. We all volunteered when we became soldiers. We knew this day might come. The first Mordak landing craft touched down near the base perimeter. Through the external cameras, Kethvar could see enemy soldiers pouring out of their transports in overwhelming numbers. The humans had perhaps 200 defenders against several thousand attackers. You cannot win this fight, Kethvar said. Why not surrender? Commander Yoon looked at him with an expression of genuine surprise. Surrender? To the Mordak? They do not take prisoners, especially not human prisoners. They consider us a dangerous contamination that must be eliminated completely. Even if they did take prisoners, Staff Sergeant Na added, surrender would mean allowing them to capture everything in this base. Weapons, technology, intelligence about coalition forces. They would use it to win the war and destroy every free world in the galaxy. The battle for the base perimeter began with a fury that surprised even Kethvar, who had already witnessed human combat capabilities. The defenders fought with a desperation that went beyond normal military tactics. They took risks that no rational soldier would consider, charging into enemy positions that should have been impossible to attack. But Kethvar realized that the humans were not trying to win the battle. They were trying to buy time for Protocol 7 to work properly. Every minute they delayed the Mordak was another minute, for the base's destruction systems to prepare, and for the evacuation shuttles to get further away. How long until the destruction sequence can be activated? Commander Yoon asked. 15 minutes for full preparation, Na Young replied. But we can activate emergency protocols in 5 minutes if necessary. What is the difference? Full preparation ensures complete destruction of all sensitive materials and equipment. Emergency protocols just bring down the buildings and hope the explosion destroys everything important. Commander Yoon nodded and continued watching the battle displays. The human defenders were being pushed back steadily, but they were making the Mordak pay heavily for every meter of ground. Bodies from both sides littered the area around the base. Sir, I have a problem, Na Young announced. The destruction sequence requires manual activation from the main reactor room. The automated systems have been damaged by weapons fire. How many people does manual activation require? One person can do it, but they would need to stay in the reactor room to make sure the sequence completes properly. The explosion will vaporize everything within 2 kilometers. Kethavar felt sick. Someone has to die to activate the destruction sequence? Someone has to make sure it works correctly, Commander Yoon replied. If the sequence fails, the Mordak capture everything. That cannot be allowed to happen. Staff Sergeant Na Young stood up from her console and checked her sidearm. I will go. I know the reactor systems better than anyone else. No, Commander Yoon said firmly. You are needed here to coordinate the final evacuation. I will handle the reactor. Sir, with respect, the base needs you to command the final defense. I can manage the reactor sequence. Kethavar watched this conversation with growing horror. They were discussing who would die as if they were deciding who would take the next watch duty. There was no fear in their voices, no hesitation. They had accepted that one of them would not survive, and they were simply determining who could best complete the mission. I will do it, announced Sergeant Kim Dao from the doorway. He had returned from the perimeter fighting with his uniform torn and blood on his face. The defense is holding for now, but we have maybe 10 more minutes before they break through. I can reach the reactor room and complete the sequence. Kim, you do not have to do this, Commander Yoon said. Someone has to do this. Kim replied. I have no family waiting for me. The others do. It makes sense for me to stay. The casual way he made this decision terrified Kethavar more than anything else he had witnessed. Sergeant Kim was volunteering to die not out of desperation or heroic impulse, but because it was the logical choice based on their circumstances. There has to be another way, Kethavar said desperately. Some method that does not require anyone to die. There is no other way, Commander Yoon replied. This is war. People die in war. The only choice we have is whether their deaths accomplish something useful. Sergeant Kim left for the reactor room while the final evacuation shuttles prepared for departure. Kethavar found himself assigned to one of the last shuttles, along with essential personnel and sensitive equipment that could not be allowed to fall into enemy hands. As they boarded the shuttle, Kethavar could hear the sounds of fighting getting closer to the main base buildings. The journey back to Veltar space took 3 weeks. Kethavar spent most of that time alone in his quarters, staring at the data he had collected during his assignment with human forces. Every time he tried to write his report, he found himself stopping after a few sentences. How could he explain what he had witnessed to beings who had never seen warfare like this? The Confederation High Command had expected a simple assessment of human military capabilities. They wanted to know if humans would be useful allies or dangerous liabilities. Instead, Kethavar found himself writing what amounted to a warning about the most terrifying species the galaxy had ever encountered. When his transport ship finally docked at Veltar Central Command, Admiral Vextel was waiting for him personally. The Admiral's expression showed curiosity mixed with concern. Word had already reached command about some of the human military actions, though the reports were incomplete and often contradictory. Welcome back, Admiral Vextel said as they walked toward the debriefing room. I trust your assignment was educational. Educational, Kethavar repeated quietly. Yes, that is one way to describe it. The debriefing room was the same one where Kethavar had received his assignment months ago. The same holographic displays, the same comfortable chairs, the same sense of civilized order that characterized all Veltar facilities. But after months with human forces, the peaceful environment felt artificial and fragile. Your preliminary reports have been concerning, Admiral Vextel said as he activated the recording systems. Some of the tactics you described seem to violate basic principles of civilized warfare. Kethavar looked at the Admiral and wondered how to explain what he had learned. The humans do not recognize the same principles that govern other species. They view warfare as a problem to be solved using any available tools, including tools that other species would never consider using. Give me specifics. What makes human military capabilities different from other species? Kethavar pulled up his data files and began with the most basic observations. Humans can function effectively under psychological warfare that completely incapacitates other species. They resist fear-inducing weapons, pain-inducing weapons, and confusion-inducing weapons through psychological conditioning that begins in childhood. Interesting, but not unprecedented. Several species have developed resistance to psychological warfare. Not like this, Kethavar replied. Other species develop technological countermeasures or genetic modifications. Humans teach their children to embrace fear and pain as sources of information, rather than as instructions to retreat. They have culturally evolved to view suffering as a tool. Admiral Vextal made notes on his datapad. What about their tactical capabilities? They are extremely effective at urban warfare, improvised weapons creation, and asymmetric tactics. They can turn any environment into a battlefield and any civilian technology into military equipment. But that is not what makes them dangerous. What makes them dangerous? Kethavar paused, trying to find words that would convey the full horror of what he had witnessed. They have weaponized their own mortality. They use their willingness to die as a tactical advantage that terrorizes enemies and achieves strategic objectives. The Admiral stopped taking notes and looked up. Explain that statement. During my time with them, I witnessed humans volunteer for certain death not out of desperation, but as a calculated military decision. They analyze the strategic value of their own lives and determine whether dying will accomplish more than living. When death serves their goals better than survival, they choose death without hesitation. That sounds like normal military sacrifice.
Many species have soldiers who will die for their comrades or their cause.
No, Kethavar said firmly. Normal military sacrifice happens when soldiers choose death over dishonor, or when they die trying to save others. Human military sacrifice is different. They die to deny resources to enemies, to send psychological messages, to achieve tactical advantages. They have turned suicide into a weapon system. Admiral Vextal set down his datapad and studied Kethavar carefully. Are you certain about these observations? They suggest a level of psychological abnormality that would be concerning in any species. I am certain. I watched a human sergeant volunteer to manually detonate a nuclear reactor, knowing he would be vaporized, because it was the most efficient way to deny strategic assets to the enemy. He made this decision calmly, without fear or regret. His comrades accepted his sacrifice as a reasonable tactical choice. The Admiral was quiet for several minutes, processing this information. Finally, he spoke again. What is your assessment of human effectiveness as military allies? They are extraordinarily effective, Kethavar replied. They win battles that should be impossible to win. They complete missions that other species would consider suicidal. They adapt to new threats faster than any species I have studied, but they represent a long-term threat to galactic civilization. Their approach to warfare is so fundamentally different from accepted norms that they may eventually destabilize the entire balance of power. Admiral Vextal activated additional security protocols before continuing the conversation. The room sealed itself and privacy shields activated to prevent any outside monitoring. I need you to be very specific about this threat assessment, the Admiral said. The High Command will want detailed analysis. Kethavar organized his thoughts carefully. Humans view warfare as an extension of evolution. They believe that conflict is the natural state of intelligent life, and that peace is simply a temporary pause between wars. This philosophy makes them extremely dangerous as enemies and potentially dangerous as allies. Why dangerous as allies? Because they do not distinguish between temporary enemies and permanent threats. If humans ever decide that another species poses a long-term danger to their survival, they will not attempt negotiation or containment. They will seek complete elimination of the threat. The Admiral's expression grew more serious. Do you believe humans would turn against the Confederation? Not immediately. Right now, humans need allies against the Mordak Empire, but humans think in very long timescales. They plan for conflicts that may not happen for generations. If they ever conclude that the Confederation's technology or resources represent a threat to human expansion, they will act preemptively. Kethavar pulled up additional files from his observations. I need to show you something that I discovered during my final week with human forces. I was not supposed to see this information, but I gained access to their historical databases. The holographic display showed records from human history, translated into Veltar language by the analysis computers. Admiral Vextel studied the information with growing alarm. These records suggest that humans have had contact with other spacefaring species before joining our coalition, the Admiral said, slowly. Not contact, Kethavar corrected. Conflicts. At least 3 different species encountered humans during their early expansion into space. None of those species exist anymore. What happened to them? According to human historical records, they were eliminated as potential threats to human survival. The records describe these conflicts as defensive actions, but the pattern is clear. Humans do not coexist with species they view as competitors. Admiral Vextal studied the records more carefully. How long have humans been capable of interstellar travel? Much longer than they told us. Their official story is that they developed faster-than-light travel 50 years ago. The actual records suggest they have been traveling between stars for over 2 centuries. They spent that time exploring, expanding, and eliminating potential rivals. Why did they reveal themselves to us now? Kethvar had been asking himself the same question. I believe they decided the galaxy was ready for their presence. The Mordak Empire provided them with an excuse to join galactic civilization as allies rather than conquerors. They are using this war to study coalition technology and tactics. For what purpose? To determine which species represent long-term threats and which can be safely absorbed into human-dominated space. They are not just fighting the Mordak. They are evaluating all of us. The Admiral was quiet for a long time, reading through the human historical records. Finally, he looked up at Kethvar with an expression of deep concern. What do you recommend? Immediate reassessment of our relationship with humans. We should not share advanced technology or strategic information. We should not allow human forces to operate near critical Confederation worlds. And we should begin developing contingency plans for the possibility that humans may eventually view us as enemies. You are suggesting we prepare for war against our own allies? I am suggesting we prepare for the possibility that our allies may not remain allies forever. Humans plan for conflicts generations in advance. We should do the same. Admiral Vextal deactivated the recording systems and security protocols. This briefing will be classified at the highest levels. Your report will be distributed only to the most senior members of the High Command. As they prepared to leave the briefing room, the Admiral asked one final question. In your professional opinion, what is the greatest danger humans represent? Kethavar thought about everything he had witnessed during his time with human forces.